basically my point with that is, so when you actually get all these substances in your body, you'll start to notice when you do get connected with the sun, you're going to be able to take in the sun. That's the point of this. And the sun upgrades your DNA. It upgrades the chromosomal expression that is one of the number one theories in longevity. It's called your telomeres. It's one of the number one theories why we age so fast. Your telomeres are basically like these little end caps of your chromosomes. So I don't know if you can throw up like a chromosome picture of our DNA so people can see what I'm talking about. But basically in our DNA strand, what's called our chromosomes, we have these end caps, which are basically like the plastic on shoelaces, if you want to think of it that way. And over the aging cycle, the more stuff we do to our body, the more we go through aging, those end caps start to shrivel and they start to break off. So, okay, so right here, these are telomeres. This is your chromosomes, and that's what keeps your DNA protected. And your chromosomes contain virtually all the information of your genetics. They tell everything where to go, what to do, that kind of thing. So the telomeres start to get dwindled down, basically. And that's why people age the way they do. They start having the phenotypical physical signs of aging. Does that make sense? Now, what protects that is, it's basically like all the different factors of good health, which we're not going to go into all that. But one of the things we know for sure is that the information in the colors of food directly affects the replication of telomeres and the replication of our cells that allows us to continue to age gracefully. And so the sun, by the way, has a lot of that information. And our ability to take in the sun, and the more sun we can take in safely and effectively, starts to upgrade us in a way where we actually become like superheroes. Like superfood superheroes. It's a real thing. I have friends that are having children right now, and they've been in this for a decade or so, just like me, and now they're having children because now they've cleaned out their body. They don't have any heavy metal, glyphosate, any whatever contamination in their body that we do know does travel through the umbilical cord into a newborn, by the way. And they've completely cleaned themselves out, and now I'm seeing a lot of my friends having children that are like, that are just like little avatars. I mean, you probably have seen this experience too. It's like it's a whole new emergence of what the human being is becoming or wants to become. The good news is you don't have to be reborn to have that experience. Maybe by the renewal of your mind or something. But you don't have to wait till the next life cycle, if that, whatever that means. You can actually activate your genetic potential now by upgrading your operating system, by upgrading your nutrition strategy. One of the great things I want to bring in on this is the topic about CBD. This actually brings up a great point about this. Now, CBD, cannabidiol, is one of 100 cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. CBD is getting the main focus because it is a compound that is most associated with a seemingly unlimited list of relief symptoms for virtually everything that we see in the world, whether that's anxiety, all kinds of psychiatric or psychological and psychic issues, disturbances, physical issues like chronic aches, pains, inflammation, joint pain, hormonal dysregulation, basically things that disturb the fluidity of the human experience, if you want to think about that. One of the things we most associate that with is inflammation, right? That's a common term that we're all pretty familiar with. And basically, inflammation just means that there's a fire in the body. And in a more technical sense, that's a mitochondrial fire. And your mitochondria is basically how your cells create energy, or metabolic energy. So a lot of people think they're getting energy from food. Kind of keeps driving in this point I'm making. Your body actually takes more energy to digest and process food than it does to than it gets energy to perform. We know this because what happens after we have a meal? Are we ready to run a marathon? Not typically, right? Digestion actually takes the most amount of energy of any metabolic function, which is really why it's really great to get on a liquid-based superfood type of approach. That was one of the other things I wanted to point out too, is that where we're going with all this is more of a liquid-based nutrition strategy than just a physical food strategy. If you can get yourself into a place, it doesn't happen overnight, but if you can get yourself into a place over a certain amount of time where you're only consuming 1 to 2 meals a day, then that is the most ideal. Not going to be the same for everyone, but if you can think of that as like a little bit of a roadmap, and then the rest of the time you're just doing liquids. 1 liter of water in the morning, a green juice, or maybe you have your chlorella or your power shake or whatever in your green juice. You have herbal teas, you have a superfood smoothie. You see where I'm going? This is all liquid nutrition, which does give you energy, and then you start to migrate into a place where you want to you have so much energy that you want to ground the energy towards the nighttime, and then you have your solid food. Does that idea make sense? Pretty reasonable? Cool. So back to CBD. So one of the things I want to point out about all this cannabis legality stuff is anyone pretty aware of our current situation with legislature and politics, multiple ticks, is basically what that term means, right? It's amazing. Yeah. Yes, there are parasitic forces in our world. Anyways, so all the malarkey going on there, I want to just say something for the record. The reason cannabis has been illegalized is not because it's the gateway drug. I mean, most of us know from our own experience that's the most ridiculous proposition ever, right? Right? Yeah. But that's not the reason. The reason is because the cannabis plant has endogenous, it has compounds that are endogenous, meaning within the human body, that are medicinal. The reason that it has been opposed so heavily is because it has it's the technical term I'm looking for. It has mind-altering potential to cause people to think outside of their linear box, right? Most of us know that intuitively. It's like kind of obvious. But when we start talking about CBD, then it gets really interesting because there's so much incredible research that's been done on the cannabis plant. Like I mentioned before, there's over 100 of what's called cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are certain compounds associated with cannabis that have potentially medicinal and therapeutic effects. A few of them are THC, which is we have a most common relationship through certain activities, right? And that's tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. Then there's CBD, and then there is CBD1, which is most in the brain tissue and in the neurological system. There's CBD2, which is in other areas of the body. Then there's CBDC, there's CBG. I mean, it's like an endless list of stuff. It's unbelievable how deep this is. CBD, though, is really, really interesting because inside our body, we have something called, THCV, Delta 9, THC, CBN. I mean, it's unlimited. All you need to know about that is that this is a powerful plant. And it can be used and alchemized and distilled in a way that is very beneficial. It's safe, does not have psychoactive effects. But it does activate certain neurological potential. It does allow you to deregulate the stress system that we call the sympathetic system, which is basically the stress response system. Where you're basically locked into a sympathetic state. Your nervous system, if you're too stressed and you've taken on micro PTSD, which is what most people in a city environment are undergoing, low-level PTSD, right? Low-level post-traumatic stress syndrome, whether that's from their childhood and it was never resolved, or it's just the daily grind, right? The hustle and grind. There's stress imprints that are going on in people's nervous system, and that nervous system can actually get locked in place and locked into a stress response where somebody doesn't even realize they're stressed because it's become their normality. It's become their way of life. Their operating system is actually just basically it's operating from a place of stress, and they don't actually know what it's like to be relaxed or to be modulated. Same thing with healing. So many people are so used to being sick and tired, they don't actually know what it feels like to feel good until you do. And all of a sudden, your life changes because you knew it was possible. You knew that this was available to you, but you didn't actually have a visceral experience of what it felt like to actually be healthy. But once you have that experience, it's probably the most powerful, life-changing moment. One of the things I love about things like CBD and a lot of the other superfoods and stuff we're talking about is that they have adaptogenic properties. An adaptogen technically means an adaptogen is something that basically makes you more resilient. It makes your biology more adaptable to various forms of stress. Does that make sense? In our body, we have something called an endocannabinoid system. This is a whole body of research that's been coming out. And basically what we find out about this is that there is an intrinsic system in our body called the endo, meaning, again, endogenous, from within, cannabinoid system, which helps to regulate our hormone function. It helps to regulate our detoxification pathways. It helps to regulate our nervous system response. Can anyone give me a guess of what the endocannabinoid system runs on? I don't know, just throw it out. What do you think? Good guess. Yeah, exactly. And probably a lot of these other compounds that we're still discovering called cannabinoids. CBD1, CBD2 happen to be the most pronounced that we know about. And so one of the interesting things I find about this too, and I'm gonna close out this particular talk on this note. One of the things that I came through in my research over the years is that I didn't know that I was studying cannabinoids. And again, those are a lot of the compounds that I mentioned. There's another compound called anandamide. Has anyone heard of anandamide? How about a term called ananda? If you're in yoga circles, Ayurveda, there's a term called ananda, which loosely translates to bliss. Loose translation, bliss, nirvana, that kind of thing. Well, it turns out that there is a compound in the brain, there's a receptor compound in the brain for anandamide. And this is called the bliss chemical. This was discovered somewhere in the 1980s through chocolate research. And the only food in the world that contains anandamide is chocolate. Yeah, it does make sense, actually. It makes a lot of sense to me. And what's interesting about that, though, is that the compound, okay, this right here, this is the structure of the anandamide, and then this is the DNA structure of THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. And again, THC is the psychoactive component of cannabis. Now, I was wondering for a long time, because I studied psychiatric conditions and pharmaceutical medication and just neurological imbalances, and I wanted to understand why is there a compulsive, addictive pattern with smoking cannabis? I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but that's not necessarily the most effective way to get the medicinal side of the plant, and it does create carcinogens, and it does have other not so great potential effects as well, chronic usage. And I was thinking about this because I was thinking about this concept of natural highs, right? Why do we take in substances to get high? Well, it's probably because we're not able to naturally get high, right? But we want to get high because a lot of times we just feel so low that we need something to get us out, take the edge off of life, right? And if our brain is functioning properly and our neurotransmitters are firing properly, like our dopamine, our GABA, our serotonin, etc., etc., if everything is firing optimally, then it stands to reason that we should feel high as a normal experience, right? I started looking at this whole kind of abuse of smoking cannabis, and I started looking at this research, and I noticed something interesting. The THC molecule is almost identical to the anandamide molecule, the anandamide structure. Now, I heard from people for years that the reason that they think that smoking weed was really therapeutic is because we have a THC receptor in the brain. Well, it turns out we don't have a THC receptor in the brain. We have a receptor in the brain that is almost identical to anandamide, so the THC can fit in there, but you know what else fits in there like a key in a lock? CBD. Exactly. That's a pretty profound discovery. It's a pretty profound discovery. So I'm really all for this movement, because to kind of round this particular talk out, I was talking about superfoods being a source of nutrition that we probably never ever got before in our life. Well, the fact that we have this endocannabinoid system that regulates all major functions of the body, including our serotonin and our dopamine. Our dopamine is the pleasure and reward system, and oftentimes if we have a dopamine deficiency, we will be seeking pleasure to avoid pain, and that pleasure will usually be temporary pleasure. So smoking, like whatever, people watching, certain things on the internet, getting likes on your Facebook, whatever the thing is, food, to get that temporary dopamine stimulation so we feel good. But then what always happens after? And you need more of it just to feel what you felt before, right? We call that a drug addiction or an addiction, right? It's the pleasure reward system, but it's really a pleasure pain cycle. One of the great ways to start to get out of the pleasure pain cycle is to make sure that you have the nutrients that modulate the system. Can you guys see how so many of these behavioral issues are biologically driven? Right? It's not just what you think. It's not just like, okay, I'm just going to do all the personal development work. I'm just going to force myself to be a better person. I'm going to force myself through willpower to eat better and to let go of these habits and et cetera, et cetera. Right? Does willpower ever work? I mean, it's good to, you need to have a will, right? You need to have the will to do things. But it's a lot easier when your operating system is working on all cylinders. You don't need as much willpower. And so CBD comes at the perfect time as a nutrient or a category of nutrients that we probably never ever got in our life. And maybe we were substituting those nutrients with another compound that was giving us a little bit of that, but wasn't giving us really, really what we wanted. which was to experience unlimited, never-ending, everlasting natural highs.